I'll write it and we'll do it live.
The music, I guess, it starts my feet tapping and I get all happy inside.
You will not laugh. You will not cry. You will learn by the numbers. I will teach you.
Would you stop with the damn drumming?
You ain't got no problem, Jules. Then wait for the wolf, who should be coming directly.
You sending the wolf?
I'm just having the time, having the time.
I want all of you to enjoy your cake. So, enjoy.
Drums. I don't like the sound of those drums. An Indian hollered back, he ain't our regular drummer.
Once again, the little podcast that could is forging new territory. We are breaking new ground here. Not only are we going to end up doing our first question and answer show, but we are doing it remotely with two guests who live locally. John, how's your Skype connection, buddy?
Sounds good. I'm happy. I got so much to do this week that this is making a huge difference in my time restraints. Some people don't know, like for you and I to get together is quite a commitment of time.
It is not a stretch to say that our mutual round trip commute times are significantly longer than the shows themselves.
Yeah, most of the time that's correct.
I mean, if we ended up doing shows that were longer than our commute, we would end up doing like one show per quarter, the drummer's quarterly Groovecast.
That would be about all of the interest there would be.
Well, let me say this before we jump into our question and answers for the day, is that you've heard us talk over the past, I guess, 2 or 3 episodes that we have been humbled beyond belief regarding the amount of positive listener feedback to this second season that we are halfway through right now. And in particular, I wanted to take just a couple of minutes before we started answering questions to talk about some of the feedback, read a couple of listener emails. They're not questions, they're just comments about these past 2 shows, which were the J.M. Van Eaton interview, and then there was the Roger Hawkins artist feature. And let me start first with the episode 2 shows ago, which was the J.M. Van Eaton episode. And here's just a few quick comments. From Adam, we got superb interview. From Steve, we got great interview, probably one of my favorite episodes. And from some of our friends over at Symbolholic, we got, thanks, JM is one of my biggest influences. And that's kind of interesting, man, because you don't normally hear that very often from a standpoint. I mean, a lot of people know who JM is, but I mean, here's somebody that just flat out said he was one of the biggest influences. So that's very nice to have.
Yeah, it's so interesting, man. We get so locked into the big name and the big superstar, high profile thing. And there's, when you're talking about these early pioneers that, like I think like playing that style of music is not something you have to kind of dive in and really figure out the details of it. The old Chuck Berry stuff, the Sun Records stuff. It's not, some people think it's like, oh, this straight 8 rock and roll groove. And it's kind of in between the cracks. And it doesn't surprise me that there are some people that really, consider some of those guys big influences, because once you start digging into that music, it's pretty fascinating and intoxicating to learn to play that way.
Yeah, you and I were talking about also that there's a real virtual cult following for that rockabilly style music, especially in Europe. And the listens from Europe, at least the ones that we can tell for sure, we've gotten a significant amount of listens from the European fans. So big props. Yeah. And then I want to read a couple of short emails that we received regarding the Roger Hawkins artist feature. And one we got that came directly from our webpage. It's from a gentleman named Jim, and he says, I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this season's episodes. Really great. I listened to the Roger Hawkins episode today and thought it was fantastic. Being from the Detroit metro area, I love listening to people from other parts of the country discuss Bob Seger. When I got home today from work after listening to the podcast, I went through some of my old CDs of Seger, listened to them, and wished I still had the vinyl. Keep up the great work, Jim. And there was significantly more in that email. I edited it out, but that's the meat of it. And then we got another very nice email on our SoundCloud hosting page. And it says, love the Groovecast. Great job, guys, especially the latest one on Roger Hawkins. I met Roger and the rest of the Swampers in the early 80s down in Muscle Shoals. Our first serious demo to be shopped to record companies was cut in Broadway studios with David Johnson. Roger and the gang were around, and we grooved with him some. Great times. We were offered several terrible record contracts, but fortunately we were smart enough not to take them. Maybe we gave up some fame, but avoided the pitfalls of the record industry from those days. Thanks, the Moderns. And that's an existing band. He didn't give his actual name, but that he just used his band name from his SoundCloud account. So really nice, guys. Yeah, we really appreciate it.
Yeah, it means a lot. We don't, this is a labor of love for sure. And to get positive feedback is huge. It really kind of validates our efforts, and it's appreciated.
Well, and just continuing along that theme, since we've been doing the show, we have always encouraged our listeners to reach out to us if you have any questions or if you have any type of ideas for future shows, and you guys certainly take us up on that. And over the past couple years since we've been doing the shows, we have answered a lot of emails, and then there's a lot that have been asked again. Like sometimes we get the same. As a matter of fact, 2 of these questions that we're going to tackle today have been asked previously, and I think we have kind of touched on them before. But we have a bunch of new questions as well. And we want to address them in our first ever full show of question and answers. And let me go ahead and say this also. We always get back to you personally if you...
Bill does. I just want to make sure that... I think there's one I never returned.
You get back to people as well, especially if there's something addressed to you, and I go, hey John, this guy really wants to know what you think about this.
Yeah,
patience is a virtue, right?
I don't know why anyone would want my opinion.
But we've gotten a crop of new questions, and this is our first time we've ever dedicated a full show to question and answer. But these questions that we're going to look at today, most of them are pretty deep. When you guys ask questions, a lot of times there's not easy answers. So I thought that John and I would take a few minutes, talk about each one, give you our opinions on each one, and just see what you guys think about it. And like I said, again, if you do email us directly or message us directly, somebody will get back to you with an answer. So all these have been answered to their respective askers. So, John, let's go ahead and dig in. And here's our first question. And the question is, how do you get anything substantial accomplished with minimal practice time? And this question was sent in by a gentleman, an adult, who is not a full-time musician. And he's got limited time due to work, family commitments, etc. And so... Mm-hmm. John, you want to take a stab at this, or you want me to go first?
I'll go.
Go for it.
I feel I'm highly qualified to talk about minimal practice time. It really has nothing to do with my schedule, just my laziness. But nonetheless, when I thought about this question, and I think from my perspective, if you really truly have minimal time, I think what makes the most sense to me is to focus on something and try to master it, no matter how long it takes, instead of trying to go broad with, 50 things that are thrown at you about what you need to have together. Just take one. What is it? Is it your 16th note groove is suffering because of your right hand? Well, just focus on that in your practice time. If it's 2 days or 2 weeks, whatever it is, focus on it and master it, and just get to the point where it's second nature. Get to the point where it's, you really feel confident about it, and then move on to something else. But be realistic about what you want to accomplish as a player, and then make a list. And with minimal time, you're gonna have to be patient. But I think it's best under those circumstances not to spread yourself too thin. Kind of lock down on something and get it together, and then move on to something else. That's my advice.
I am wholeheartedly agreeing with that. That is exactly my point. Also, I'm going to elaborate on a few little things also that might add some to it. Much to your point, John, the main thing is if you've only got 15, 20 minutes every few days to work on something, one, you need to set a realistic goal, and then you have to be organized to achieve that goal. You need to be very specific and very mindful during that short amount of time that you have. And like, for example, if you got an upcoming gig and there's a couple of songs that you have to learn, you need to be very mindful and go straight for that. Have a very goal-specific style practice routine.
Yeah, that's got to be a priority.
Yeah. Sure. It's the same thing. If you've got a particular method or a chapter out of a method book, if you don't have gigs, again, be focused on that and work on that. Now, with that in mind, I'm going to say a couple things that are going to revolve around this thing of having too much distraction. One, keep electronics and other electronic distractions away during that short 15 or 20 minute amount of practice time that you got. I mean, that is incredibly important. And one of the main reasons, aside from getting phone calls and text messages, is it is so easy to get bogged down when you have way too much information, like through YouTube or websites or something like that. A lot of times we're really good at being researchers for this type of information or this type of work or practice that we're working on. And what ends up happening is we research and we research and we research, and we never end up working on the stuff that needs to be worked on. And so all of a sudden that 15 or 20 minutes of what could have been your practice time is spent looking on YouTube at videos of which probably 3/4 of them are not even worth your time looking at. And along that same line, you got to be careful if you've got this short amount of time that you don't inundate yourself with too many things in that practice time. Like, it's great to all of a sudden have 4 or 5 method books, like, oh, well, I want to work out of the syncopation book, I want to work out of the new breed, I want to work out of Chafee patterns. Well, any one of those 3 books is basically a lifetime study. And
yeah, if you only have 15 minutes a day, you're going to go nuts.
Yeah, you're going to be so far in over your head, you're going to get discouraged and quit. So you've got to really make sure that if you are going to work on one of these method books, be realistic and take just a small chunk out of it and try to accomplish it. That's significantly going to benefit you in the long term, more than sitting there trying to think that you've got to work on 3 different methods in a 15-minute period of time. And
Amen.
Yeah. And so, just be realistic with what you've got, the time that you got, and then make sure you set some achievable goals where you don't want to look for perfection. You just want to look for excellence, and you want to make sure that you spend the proper amount of time that you've got working on the things that need to be worked on. And for that much, if you only have like those 15 or 20 minutes a day, if you've got that amount of organization and mindfulness behind you, you're going to be better off than probably 90% of most people who have multiple hours a day. So you can get a lot done in that short amount of time. So that's my answer. And Hey, John, I want to piggyback on something that you got a ton of positive response from. You posted a really cool thing on Facebook the other day about this great little practice kit that you put together, and you even made the point that, hey, I've got a limited amount of time, but I got stuff I got to do. Just tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll dive into the next question after that.
Well, it came down to a couple things. One is, as far as practice goes, I didn't have a lot of time that no one was in the house and all that. I have a neighbor who works overnight as well, and wanting to be mindful of all that, I came up with a solution. It was I have a nice little small kit down there. I put on those silent stroke heads, the mesh heads, and I got those Zildjian low volume cymbals, which the bane of my existence in practicing at a low volume was I had pads on cymbals, like, that HQ pads or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And it was horrible. They didn't feel right. These cymbals feel incredible, and they inspire me to practice a little more. And a little hack that I came up with that seemed to be what some people really were fascinated with was I took car door trim. It's a little, plastic strips of hard rubber strips that you put on the edge of your car doors. And I put them around the hoops of the drums to take some of the volume down on the rims, the sticks hitting the rims. So it served me well. I've been using it a lot. And, on top of that, I'm not just getting killed with volume. I have plenty of that when I work. So it's nice to not be so incredibly loud decibel levels at some ungodly thing. And, so I'm really digging it. That's kind of where we're at with that.
Hey, one quick question before we move on. You mentioned in that post that you were doing it because you felt like that you needed to have a little bit of practice time every day. And you even alluded kind of maybe off the cuff. It's like, this old body needs something to practice on to keep even moderately in shape so that when I get to the next gig, it's going to be okay. What are you doing? Yeah. What are you doing in those 15, 20, 30 minutes?
I typically, I always start out just kind of free form and just start messing around. And, I'm not much of a chops guy, but every once in a while I'll kind of stumble into something that's pretty cool. It's not terribly difficult, but it sounds nice. So I kind of mess around with that. Free form solos, so to speak, just getting warmed up. I'm a really great soloist in my basement when no one's listening. That's what I figured out.
Well, that's your next Facebook Live.
Yeah, right. But I dig, like right now, I'm in a period of time where I've had to learn a ton of tunes and be prepared for some rehearsals and some gigs. So, I warm up with that, but just playing through stuff. And when I talk about my body, my biggest concern with that is from gig to gig, man, I'll have a gig where it's just effortless. And then I'll have a gig where I cannot get comfortable. I have no flow. And it's just miserable. It's miserable. And that kind of thing can really, kind of blow up in your face too.
Yeah.
So I've just kind of thought, well, I need to address a couple of things. One is playing a little bit every day to work some of that out. And, also like my joints are starting to suffer a little bit. So I've taken some supplements that are helping, but that's just taking supplements on their own. Like a biggest battle for me playing is my technique's not great. And, I might not play for 3 or 4 days and then sit down and have to blaze a gig. So I'm trying to head off that frustration with spending a little time every day playing. I don't know if I'm practicing, but I'm playing. I guess I'm practicing learning songs. I'm not practicing in a method sense, but whatever.
But it is goal specific, though.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Good deal.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, that's it.
Second question. What can I do to save a cracked cymbal? Ooh, boy, now that's a tough one. There are some answers. They're not all necessarily great answers, and they need to be approached from the different kind of cracks that we know that can happen. And the big ones are the edge crack, the lathing groove crack, and then cracks that stem from the mounting hole in the center of the bell. This is a tough one, man. I want to say one quick thing first, John, and then we'll start throwing our remedies out. The first thing that I would do is if you see a crack, and I don't care where it is, if it's in the bell, if it's on the edge, or if it's in a lathing groove, take a pen or a marker and mark the ends of the crack. And all you're doing there is you're going to monitor it over the next couple of, performances or practice sessions and see if it's actually advancing. And the reason that I'm saying that is that not all cracks advance. Now, I would say most of them do, but let me give you my quick story of one that did not. I had an older, I guess it was probably the early 90s. John, do you remember the Zildjian pre-aged Ks?
Sure.
I had a pre-aged K that developed a small crack that came from the mounting hole. And it probably didn't go any more than 3/8 of an inch. And I thought, this is going to be one of those things that I'm going to have to end up having it drilled or something. I marked it with a marker, and after I noticed it and made the mark, it never advanced. And
that's nice.
Yeah, and so the point of this entire thing is that you don't want to end up trying to fix a cymbal that has a crack that develops and then never gets any further if it's not making any sound or if it's not directly inhibiting the sound of the cymbal. So that's the first thing that I wanted to say.
Yeah.
John, you want to go ahead?
Backing up. One thing that, cracked cymbals are a continual problem with certain players. And I just think the most important thing that we all should be mindful of with the cost of cymbals as they are now is proper technique. And I see lots of guys who don't use proper technique. The swiping motion that's not just pipe, man. That's like, I remember Zildjian, who would benefit from cracked cymbals, saying, "Hey, swipe," and so that's something that we all should be mindful of and try to be better about. And then this subject would be less of an issue for everyone. That being said, when it comes to cracks, personally, I only deal with edge cracks. I don't lathe cracks. They're really, I've seen people notch them out and all that. I don't have the patience or maybe even the tools to do that properly. But edge cracks, I normally, if I try to get them early, 1/4 inch or whatever, and I mark it, and then I use snips to notch that out, and then I use a Dremel tool with a metal, something that is designed to, I can't remember what the actual part is, but it kind of acts as a file, if you will, and you can finesse that and really make like the curves and all that real smooth. And if you have a good sounding cymbal, 9 times out of 10 with a small crack, if you make that little notch, it still sounds fantastic. I have 2 or 3 at home that are still fantastic sounding cymbals. So bell cracks, I don't mess with them. I don't know the proper way to, I guess you could kind of try to notch it out. John, in a less gradual way than an edge crack. But
let me tell you what my plan was going to be on that pre-aged K if that crack kept advancing. the best way that I can describe it was I was going to make that crack an intentional keyhole. Do you know what I'm saying? I was going to try to basically notch out with some sort of a Dremel / grinder kind of a thing, a small intentional keyhole. So that's what I was going to do. But again, one thing that I always tell everybody, and what I told the listener, first off, I said, you got to have a little bit of a spirit of adventure if you're going to try to fix this thing on your own. And I said, especially if it's a really treasured symbol, one that's perfect. I told him, I said, it's probably worth your while to see if you can seek someone out that is known for doing good work on cymbal repair. And of course, the one name that comes up to most people who've been in this business for a long time is a gentleman named Nodar Rode. He's been known for fixing many a cymbal, or at least doing good work on it. Sometimes when you say fixing a cymbal, everybody does their best work on it, and then it still ends up cracking. Sometimes there's just there's nothing that can be done on it. It's the proverbial stage 4 cancer patient. But I always tell them to look for somebody who knows a little bit about this and that has been, reviewed, that has good work and has worked for some other people. Now,
yeah, man, like a guy like Nodar, there's nothing he hasn't seen. That's a real advantage.
Yeah, and I might be speaking out of turn when I say this, but it could even be worth reaching out to a gentleman like Matt Bettis and seeing if he would work on it for you. Because there's probably nobody around that knows much more about making cymbals and the tendencies of cymbals than Matt Bettis.
What are they going to do? Ship it in a canoe?
Send it by Pony Express. I
found him. He was way down the river.
Man, let me tell you, I get more enjoyment on looking at Matt Bettis's social media posts than any other 30 drummers combined, because it's all exactly what you're talking about. It's like, hey, I'm getting in a canoe and going 10 miles down the river to make some cymbals. That's pretty good.
I like it.
And then, John, one last thing I want to add about edge cracks. Now, again, you're talking about being a real cowboy if you do this. Have you ever seen anybody that would have an edge crack that's maybe like a half inch into the edge of the cymbal? And let's take, for example, say it's a 19-inch crash. Have you ever seen anyone then just go, well, hey, I'm going to take the diameter of this thing down to an 18-inch crash and make it an 18? Now, that's some real cowboy stuff. I honestly have never heard anyone do that and made the cymbal sound good afterward. So
I was going to say that's insult the Cowboys, because that I have never seen a cymbal. They're not going to be the same.
No.
A thin cymbal all of a sudden becomes a medium thin cymbal.
Exactly, because of just the taper of the cymbal itself.
Yeah, so I don't like that idea. That's like, and that kind of strikes me as like grounds for someone convincing themselves that sounds good versus really sounding good. You know what I mean? It's like, nah, that doesn't work well. It's been proven time and time again that approach is really kind of worthless.
I would rather play the broken cymbal and just let it continue to break.
Well, we'll probably have plenty of people saying, I do it all the time. Like, that's cool. I don't.
Yeah. And John, I want to button this up by making one of my famous blanket broad statements.
Uh-oh.
And it's basically this, and I
Make sure it's politically correct.
Yeah, I think, though, a lot of people are going to see where I'm going with this. My experience overall when it comes to all kinds of cymbals that break and that are being repaired is that essentially cast cymbals have a tendency to break less, but when they do, they seem to repair slightly better than stamped sheet bronze. And it's just simply because of the bronze formula of stamped cymbals. It's generally a little bit more brittle, whereas the cast cymbals are a little more malleable.
Yep, I agree.
All right, so moving on. Question number 3. And this is one of these, John, that gets asked. I'd say this question has probably been asked at least 3 or 4 times. And it is there any real value to knowing music theory being a drummer? Wow, now there's an open-ended question, and
I'm going to go get a snack.
No. What I want to do is I want to first off narrow this down a little bit and say, let's approach this from the elemental parts of music theory, because the people that are asking these questions are not people that are sitting here talking about going through graduate school theory to where we're analyzing Stockhausen experimental pieces.
Or even, somewhat sophisticated inversions. That's not even, we don't need to get into any of that.
Right. And let me tell you where I want to start it at is basically, let's just take it from the most elemental standpoint of the ability to read music. We're going to call that music theory. And the answer to that is, if you have any intentions at all of really playing any sort of gigs outside of your basement or your garage band with buddies, you need to do that. You're going to make yourself a million times more available, more marketable, and more hireable if you can at least learn to read music. And it is not difficult. I can't believe how many people think that it's this incredibly elusive thing and that it's so difficult that it intrinsically takes away your ability to play music naturally if you're reading. And that's not the case at all. I mean, how about Jeff Porcaro? How about John Robinson? How about virtually every great studio drummer you've ever known are probably reading charts for the first time a lot of times and then playing these great feeling tracks. So I just want to throw that out from the beginning, that from a very elemental standpoint of music theory, reading music is highly, highly beneficial.
I agree. I think that it gets a little murky when we're talking about theory, though, because I kind of took that question as, understanding progressions or knowing, 1, 4, 5 and this kind of thing. And I don't think it ever is going to hurt a drummer to have an idea of song form or progressions that make sense, or, a 12-bar blues even,
Mm-hmm.
I think there's most people can hear a 12-bar progression, but do they understand what it is? And you could debate for a long time, how deep in it you need to be or how important it is to a drummer. And I think there's valid arguments on both sides, but I know that in communicating certain charts and certain arrangements, and that having even a minimal knowledge of certain things have helped. And I know as being in a situation where we were writing songs, being able to communicate, man, that chord doesn't work like here, and like maybe we need to try this, or even an inversion, or what we don't want in the bass, being able to hear and communicate it, that certainly is an advantage. And it's helped me to have a working knowledge of that. But from a drumming perspective, I think it has helped to not come across like an idiot,
Yeah.
in certain settings. So having a working knowledge of it, I think helps on those levels. I don't think you need to know, like you said, we don't need to get into the deepest of deep music theory as a drummer, right?
Exactly. And to your point regarding that, I kind of made these 4 levels, or these 4 examples of where you could advance in music theory and where it would be necessary or beneficial. And essentially, first we talked about, it's just, if you want to do this for a living, you at least need to be able to read. Okay, so we've established that. Maybe the second level would be this. if you have any desire that you want to compose, write music, having some basic theory knowledge, just chord scale relationships, it's going to benefit you tremendously. Say a third level would be is if you want to get to the point of being able to produce music, work with other musicians in the studio, other musicians writing, you need a baseline of theory so you can just successfully communicate with them.
Right.
And then
if you tell someone something's dumb, you probably need to tell them why.
Vocalists don't think that way.
They think.
And then the fourth way would be if you want to teach, especially on any type of significantly higher post-secondary level, then it's an absolute 100% necessity because...
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm good.
Yeah, but... Well, to use one of my famous terms, it's educational malpractice if you don't do that.
Yeah, that's true.
All right, moving on. Question number 4. And this is another one that's been asked several times. And there's a million good answers to it. What gear do I need to get a decent drum recording? Wow. So this is another multi-tiered question.
I am a huge believer and proponent of the source being the most important thing in a sound recording. Mm-hmm. And that is a good sounding, well-tuned drum set and cymbals that are musical and appropriate. Without those, I don't care what mics you have, what plugins you have, none of it matters. And that's the first and foremost what you should focus on before anything else. And that's my.
That is number 1 on the list, sir. Same over here. And then it certainly doesn't hurt if you've practiced well and you know what you're doing as far as like actually hitting the drums. Mm-hmm. Now, if you want to go to the next level as far as gear goes, now we all know that gear is an absolute money pit rabbit hole. You can take it to the nth degree, or you can take it to the most minimalistic approach. And one thing, let me use an example. Virtually everybody who's listened to this show knows who Mike Johnston is. He's a guy that was on the show last year. He is the owner of Mike'sLessons.com. He is pretty much ubiquitous in the education world these days. He makes some fantastic sounding recordings. And John, do you know how many microphones he uses?
3.
2. And I mean, they sound great. And basically, he's a guy that knows how to tune his drums. He knows how to play his drums. He's got 2 decent microphones. They're not even super high dollar microphones. And then he's got a couple of good mic preamps. And then he just records into a DAW. So he's got that going for him. So
well, there you go.
Yeah. So that's what you need. Okay. You need a computer. You need some software. That's what I call a DAW. You need an interface and however many microphones and stands you want, and then some headphones so you can monitor yourself. From there on, after that, you can add studio monitors, the actual speakers. Then from that, you can just continue adding mics. And then from there, if you want to keep going nuts, you can start adding what I call recording peripherals, all the toys and all the good stuff like different outboard gear, different effects units, and of course for the digital recorder, which we all are, there's a myriad of plugins that you can get many of them for free or very low cost that can make your DAW sound like you're recording at the record plant. So there you go. Start out simple. If you can get a good recording sound going simply, you may not need to do anything else, but John and I are in lockstep over you got to make sure that you know how to play, and then you got to have good sounding, well-tuned drums and musical cymbals.
Yep.
All right. John, this is the 5th question, and this question is a little bit alarming. And because we have actually answered this one once before, but we keep getting people asking it. And the question is, what suggestions do you have to help with or prevent carpal tunnel syndrome? And that is one, man, that's worrisome, man, that we've been getting that question asked a couple of times.
Mm-hmm. It doesn't surprise me, though.
Yeah, I know. You and I have a very good friend who has a daughter that's suffering from something similar right now, and it's something that's endemic, and I think a lot of it also has to do maybe not just with drumming, but there's so many things that we do on a daily basis that applies pressure to the carpal areas or the carpal tunnel areas of our hands that until you isolate it, you're going to have a problem knowing if it's just caused by drumming. And I think that's one of the biggest things you have to do. And then you and I have answered this question before, and one of the things that you and I both agree on is that the very first thing when it comes to thinking if it's coming from drumming is you have to get your technique pristine. You have to get it absolutely beyond reproach. And that means everything, of course, from hand technique, holding the sticks correctly, not too much restriction, and also your setup. You have to make sure that your setup is ergonomically beneficial to you and that you are not reaching for things that you shouldn't be reaching for, or you're playing on these severe angles, whether they be severely tilted or tilted away from you or whatnot. That's the first thing we want to impress upon you is that.
Yep.
The second, go ahead.
No, I'm good. I'm listening.
The next thing that I want to talk about is even when you get your technique pristine and you think you have everything exactly where it needs to be set up wise, make sure that you watch yourself either in a mirror or maybe record yourself a little bit to see that when you're playing and you're sort of in the heat of battle, that you're maintaining the technique that you've been working on. Because there's a lot of times we're sitting there maybe playing on a snare drum and we're just like playing single strokes or double strokes and we're looking at our hands and we're looking at our setup and it's like, oh yeah, things are looking good. And then all of a sudden you get into the heat in the middle of a song and technique flies out the window. So monitor yourself in actual performance style settings and then make sure that you're keeping in touch with the technique that you've been working on. And with that in mind, let me say this one quick thing about recording yourself. One of the biggest things that I harp on students about is don't sit there and record yourself working for 3 hours. You don't have enough time to go back and look at that. You need to make sure that you record yourself in short, manageable snippets where you can go back and look at yourself over the length of a song, perhaps, and make sure that your technique's not going out the window whenever you do that. So that's the second thing.
I'm not surprised by the number of inquiries we have about this and the almost an epidemic as far as drummers having these problems. And I think a big part of it is, we're talking 2 or 3 generations removed at this point with the popularization of rock and roll, and you got a number of influential drummers over the years that don't have very good technique. Mm-hmm. And you're talking when we started looking back in the 80s, and there's a lot of the hairband guys. There were a bunch of guys that were just bashing away, and some of them had exceptional technique. A lot of them didn't. And that was a big influence with a lot of drummers our age to have that stick up over your head and coming down and smashing that snare drum and heavy cymbals and all this. And, the image that is the powerhouse drummer. Well, there might be some residual effects to that. And then, you know, you're talking about, I mean, okay, let's just talk about the next generation. You got your Dave Grohls, and you've got some of those guys that were hugely influential, and maybe being the cause of some of this by way of emulation, and you know, like emulating them and what have you. And you also get into you know, the core thing is a huge influence with a lot of kids coming up, and you're banging away on a tabletop basically for, you know, hours on end all summer and all that. So it doesn't surprise me with those things in mind that you know, there's just inevitably more problems physically with drummers as we say it's evolved. Some people might say, I don't know if it's evolved, it might have gone backwards, but nonetheless, the influence is inevitable that some people are going to be really enamored with some styles of playing that maybe technique is kind of taking a second, you know, a back seat to image or attitude or the vibe of the music. And it's not right or wrong, but inevitably some people are suffering at the hand of that. I think that's just my observation, and why I think there may be more people talking about these problems than 20 years ago.
That's great observation, and I want to add one thing about the drum corps styles that you were talking about. Not only when you're playing on a Kevlar drum head that's tuned up like a brick wall can you have problems, but in the actual visual showmanship aspect of that, you also have intentional motion restriction. And when you have that combination to where, you know, they're intentionally restricting the way you hold sticks, intentionally restricting the way that you accept rebound from drums, and then you're playing on those type of extreme surfaces, there's a good tendency that you can end up developing some of those problems. So good point there.
Well, I can kind of speak to it because I'm sort of at the beginning stages of some problems, and it's I know a lot of it has to do with two things. One is I went through a phase in the 90s where I was really playing hard and heavy, and I also am kind of the generation where we went through a phase in the studio where they just wanted you bashing, you know, Kenny Aronoff bashing, you know, like that. And I've come to realize, A, I'm not that type of player, but B, I've also suffered at the hand of that a little bit, doing hours on end where you're just throwing it down, you know, and I think I'm paying for that. But also, I can certainly tell you that not doing much warm-up for the last 30 years has factored in as well. I've never been much of a warm-up guy and stretching guy, and I'm paying for that now. Now I have to, on some level. I'm not probably as dedicated as I should be, but all of those things factor into my developing some concern over my hands and wrists.
Yeah. Well, to kind of wrap this up, the last thing I wanted to say is that if you've done all these different things that we've talked about making sure your technique is where it needs to be, make sure your setup is where it needs to be, watch the velocities that you're hitting, etc. Of course, you have to go see a doctor that specializes this to try and get some form of a diagnosis. That's incredibly important. And then, you know, you should also be very, very transparent to this doctor to let this person know whether or not you're doing other things other than drumming that could be contributing to it. Because nobody wants to hear that dreaded thing of like, oh, you have to stop playing. That's an impossibility for most of us. And
yeah, I was going to say it's an impossibility. I wouldn't mind hearing it.
And
that's another story for another day.
And we had, John, a listener email us in response to one of the first time we answered this question. And we were saying, look, there are certain types of modalities that you can use that will help, combat this. And one of the ones we left out, but one of the listeners said, is that you can also visit occupational therapists that have expertise in dealing with this type of injury for the certain occupation that you're doing. So we want to throw that out there as well. And then
I have one in my house, and I'm kind of avoiding it. So go figure.
Well, let us know how that works out. And the last thing that I want to add.
She'll tell me, Phil said your technique sucks and you need to change it, and then everything would be okay. That's pretty much how that conversation would go.
You need to get your stick control book out and work on page 3.
I'd rather be a Walmart greeter.
And then the last thing I want to say is there are times that you can have these issues. You can go to the doctor. The doctor gives you either a clean bill of health or they give you the nebulous, we don't know what's going on sort of thing. And we know people that have been down that road. I was actually down that road once before with my neck and shoulder. And I will once again encourage you that if you have gone down the road, no one can diagnose you or they say you do not have carpal tunnel. I will suggest once again, go back and listen to episode 75 of this very podcast. And it's the episode with Dr. Howard Schubiner. And he has provided relief to thousands of people, including yours truly. So if you've exhausted all of the avenues and it's for sure that you have an undiagnosable problem, orthopedic problem, not just carpal tunnel, check out episode 75 with Dr. Schubiner.
All right.
John, we've done, I think, enough damage here today.
I'm damaged.
We have not done our segment on great underrated drummers this season. And as it stands right now, this is going to be our only shot at doing it. And so you made a great point when we wrapped up that last episode that we done together of we need to get this in. Mm-hmm. So we're going to get it in today. John, do you want to go first? You want me to hit it?
I'd love to go.
Go for it.
My underrated drummer he was a Los Angeles-based studio musician named John Gearin. I'd say probably his most high-profile work was with the LA Express, Tom Scott's band, and they were kind of at the forefront of modern groove jazz stuff. They definitely, when you think about smooth jazz, they were on the less cheesy end of things because they were all great players, and especially John was such a versatile player. And they backed up Joni Mitchell for quite a while, mid to late 70s, and had a lot of exposure in her heyday for sure, when she was just as prolific as they come and putting out records that a lot of people were really, really digging. They did a number of gigs and recordings with her. But John it's way deeper than that with him. He played with Zappa for off and on for a number of years, late 60s, early 70s. He's on probably 4 or 5 of his records. I don't know about the entire record, but he always was kind of floating around in those Zappa circles, and Frank would find things that he thought, oh, John would be good for this, and they'd knock it out. And he always sounded great with that. And some other rock and roll stuff. George Harrison, Linda Ronstadt. He also was in the Byrds for a short time. A lot of people don't know that. But man, he had a really, really pretty solid jazz background, and his feel and sound were always real together in that. And because of it, he worked with a lot of big names, Sinatra, Oscar Peterson, Ray Charles, and then even deeper, like Sonny Rollins and Monkey did some stuff with. Had a lot of respect in that. And the thing that sticks out to me that really showed. And there's a love-hate relationship with this, but the Bird soundtrack, that movie about Charlie Parker that Clint Eastwood did, they used a lot of Bird's solos and heads, but then they re-recorded the backing music, and John did the majority of that soundtrack, and sounds really good. And I just think he's really underrated when you look at his body of work and how versatile he was. He did a lot of other soundtrack stuff, percussion stuff. He was the drummer on the Hawaii 5-0 theme. You know, it's pretty deep, man. He was a real broad. His recording career was very broad and I would say authentic on a lot of levels too. So John Guerin, check him out, man. A really underrated LA guy that did a ton of stuff.
Great call, man. I want to make a quick recommendation for one of those LA Express records. There's a record that he did called Tomcat.
Yeah, man.
Man, that's a heck of a record right there, man. Check that one out if you can find it. You can probably find snippets of it on YouTube.
No doubt. I think he's a perfect example of someone that you can hear he has great technique when he plays.
Yeah, that's a good call, man. That's a good call.
Yeah, he's a really together player on a lot of levels.
I thought he sounded really good on that Bird soundtrack.
I do too, and I heard some people really, going on about it. And I kind of think it had more to do with maybe a racial slant than an actual performance slant, because there were some people. I remember some blowback about it, like, why do they have him? It's like, it sounds pretty good.
Yeah. John, my drummer that I'm picking today is a fellow that I actually picked an underrated drum track of his, maybe like, I don't know, 9-10 months ago. And it's the wonderful New Orleans-based drummer Herlin Riley. The reason I picked this guy is because I've recently kind of been digging into some of his back catalog of different recordings and videos and whatnot that he's done. And boy, he deserves to be talked about significantly more than he is. And I have never heard this guy play in any setting, whether it be a piano trio, a quintet, octet, or a full big band, that he didn't sound amazing. I mean, I've never heard this guy sound even moderately uncomfortable on anything that he's played. He's a New Orleans drummer that has that New Orleans swagger, but man, he has got incredible chops, and he plays with a certain precision inside of that New Orleans looseness that kind of sets him apart from a lot of the other guys. Plus, he's so steeped in that tradition down there that he can play all of the peripheral things along with drum set. Of course, he's like a master tambourine player, if you've ever seen the guy play before as well.
No,
yeah,
that's cool.
So he's an amazing player just overall. Some of his career highlights as far as like recordings, he's probably done conservatively 30 different albums with Wynton Marsalis in several different configurations, whether it be like the quintet or, Wynton had like an octet or nonette for a while he recorded with. And then, of course, that Lincoln Center jazz band. But the one record in particular I want everybody to take a listen to when you get a few minutes, because it is available on YouTube. Listen to his work with Ahmad Jamal on the Ahmad Jamal Live from Montreal Jazz Festival record. It's like a double record on vinyl. He sounds amazing, and this is from the early 80s, probably 83 or 84, somewhere in that ballpark is when that record was done, and he's just amazing. And then as far as like some videos and whatnot, he was part of a book and part of a DVD compilation that was just called New Orleans Drumming, and it had him and Johnny Vodakovich and a couple of other local New Orleans guys, just demonstrating some different traditional New Orleans style grooves, beats, some just basically going over the genre and what makes New Orleans, very unique and different among the different other styles that we play. And some of the different videos and recordings of him doing that is absolutely fantastic. And it's so geared, of course, to the drummers, where you can see and hear everything that they're doing so cleanly and so plainly that it's just great. So that's my underrated drummer. Go check out Herlin Riley.
He's a beast, no doubt. Good call.
Thank you, sir. Well, John, I'm going to say that our first remote podcast has been a success.
It appears to. I guess we'll go back and listen and find out. But I like sitting on my butt, not driving all the way to your house. So, hey, let's make it happen.
Folks, thanks as always for your patronage and listenership. We greatly appreciate your support. We're doing this show for you guys because, you guys reach out to us through your emails, through your social media, through your comments, that sort of thing. Keep the questions, comments coming. We greatly appreciate it. As always, you can listen to the show anywhere that you access your favorite podcast: iTunes, Google Play Podcast, Stitcher, Podbean, SoundCloud. Your favorite app should have it. If you can't find it, then you can head over to our website. We are at www.drummersweeklygroovecast.com. There you can listen, of course, to the shows. You can check out our videos. You can email us there. You can manage your social media subscriptions to our podcast there. Again, we just appreciate it. John, you want to add anything else?
I think... like the idea of theory. I want to get back to that real quick. Just don't be overwhelmed by that. I just kind of stuck in my brain as we're going through the show. Don't be overwhelmed with that and how you feel. I think you're better off continuing to improve your drumming and make that a secondary priority.
Good enough.
That's the only thing I wanted to go back and make sure, because I think there's some people that are going to be like, "Oh my God, music theory and all that." Man, don't get too crazy with that. Anyway, again, I thank you so much for the feedback and the support. I can't, I'm not going to be able to convey how much it means to me, but I know I speak for Phil when I say, that's what. That's the payback, because there's not much otherwise. It's knowing that people are locked in and appreciating where we're coming from, and at the same time, just being open to our opinions means a lot.
Right on. And the one thing that I'll say also about the theory thing is that it's much like the topic that we're talking about. What do you work on when you've only got a few minutes to work on it, and how can you actually make progress? Theory is, again, one of those topics. It's so deep that you can take it to the nth degree. And what I would suggest is, if anybody wants to get into the beginning parts of it, don't immediately run out and buy one of those books like the Piston book or Tonal Harmony or something like that you would use in a college theory class. You might want to try the first book of Berklee Music Theory. It's a really well laid out, practical approach to theory for like a modern rhythm section. So I know that book, and that's a good one. And then also the Alfred Essentials book to music theory is absolutely great as well. Very much the same thing. It breaks theory up into very small, meaningful chunks that you can certainly absorb and not get over your head. So,
right on. Hey, and be mindful of pain. It's important that you address pain you are getting from playing. It's really important.
Right on.
Don't ignore it.
All right, guys. We'll see you next week.
Peace.
Bye-bye.